Welcome, mamas. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm here with the guest, Renee Warren, who not too long ago launched a $1 million agency while she was 8 months pregnant with her first baby, and only 11 months later welcomed her second baby into the world, all while building, I believe, 2 houses. And so she knows how to grow businesses and babies. Today, she's the host of a successful podcast called Into the Wild, which we'll hook you up with later. And she helps women launch and run wildly successful businesses. Welcome, Renee. I'm so glad you're here to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first off, tell me, where are you from?
So I grew up in Northern Ontario, a town called North Bay.
Oh, that's way north in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. It's actually the gate. It's the gateway to the north. Literally, there is a stone sign that says gateway to the north. So we're considered Southern Ontario.
Nice. And you and your husband do something very cool now, which is you live in Moncton, but you pick cities and just go rent a house and live there for random lengths of time, right? So where are you right now?
Yeah, so we're in Kelowna, BC. We usually go to San Diego for the winter, but because of COVID, we can't. And so now we're in Kelowna, which is beautiful, amazing. You know, if you're Canadian, you've never been out here, you got to make a plan to come because there's something just so magical about the air out here and the people and the food and the fact that there's no snow. There's no snow when you're in the mountains. It's beautiful.
So great. But you can still ski because there's snow in the mountains.
Yeah. I mean, you can drive like 30 minutes away and go on the most magical ski hill. So yeah, it's beautiful.
Good. All right. I'm going to pull a book out of, or a page out of your book. You always ask your podcast hosts, what is their favorite quote? So I'm curious, what's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is by Stevie Nicks. She says, if you are gracious, you've already won the game.
Good. I always know you to be gracious. So you and I met a few years ago at a summer camp for entrepreneurs. And in my family, we do this thing on birthdays called 3 Things I Love About You. It's like a family tradition where we go around the table and everybody says 3 things they love about the birthday person. Usually it's a birthday, like I started it with my kids. So 3 things I love about you from the small amount of time we spent together and how much I followed you on social media is you're always loads of fun. I find you to be, I remember when we were at a dance party with Sammy and you were up beside Sammy, headphones on, dancing, having fun. Remember those days?
Oh my God, I remember that. I got hypnotized and I wanted to marry Justin Bieber.
The second one is you're always discerning. I love how your critical thinking, you definitely use logic when you make decisions. And I see that in both all your content and my interactions with you. And the third one is your behind the scenes reel, which we were just talking before we started the recording about your dinner last night with 2 or 3 other mamas. Do you want to kind of recap that a little bit?
Yeah. So I went out for dinner last night with 2 other women that have, like similar family values. And we were talking about this very sacred conversation about breastfeeding, and our kids are older. So most of the kids, I think the youngest is like 4 in all the children that are, that we're talking about, these women. And I was just, shamefully saying I only breastfed my boys for 2 months because I had to go back to work. I started my company and there was a lot of reasons that really was nobody else's business, but I felt super ashamed. And then the lady across the table was like, oh, well, I breastfed my daughter till she was 3. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive. But there was no judgment at the table. It was like, totally understanding each person's position. And there wasn't like, oh, that's too long, or that wasn't long enough, or not breastfeeding long enough is the reason why your kids have all these problems, like XYZ. And it was just nice to be in this open conversation and having women like provide tips when they are called for, but also totally respecting other people's position on parenting, because really at the end of the day, if your kid is fed and loved, that is all you need for a child. And we think we come at parenting from these realistically from these indoctrinated beliefs of how we're supposed to do things. And I always say the supposed to rule book needs to be burned.
So true. Yeah, totally. I'm curious, what are you most proud of as a mom?
I'm most proud of how loving my children are. And whether or not that is something that they were born with, born with, I believe that my husband and I have established these values of like, we even joke, like my husband, like they're still like 7, 8 years old. So they're little still. My husband will like pick one of them up and kiss them on the lips and cuddle them. And he's like, he always asks them like, when you're 20 years old, will you still do this? They're like, absolutely. Like, they don't know, but we really instill these values of like the cuddles, the holding the hands, the kisses, because we know that positive physical touch with a child is so important. And so we see that in their daily interactions with other people. They're gentle, they show affection. And when you show affection to somebody else, it creates these incredible relationships because it builds trust.
Yeah.
So that is one thing I am most proud of.
That's awesome. I'll tell you that I'm really similar with my kids, but they're a lot older. They're 13 and 16. And my 16-year-old son will still, he'll probably kill me for saying this if this ever gets out with his friends, but he still like sits on the couch and cuddles and watches movies with us. He crawls into my bed in the morning. And like his little sister and I just like hang out, and his little sister and him, who are so super close, they still like, they kind of argue a little on the couch, but they sit right beside each other when they watch TV. Like there's no two sides of the couch. They're just all cuddled up right beside each other. What is one thing you learned from your grandma or your mother?
Ooh, my grandmother passed away when I was 12. Oh, I know one from her is always give really good back scratches.
Oh,
Yeah, she's really good at that. And from my mother, my mom she's a tough woman, like, but very affectionate, but tough. And she taught me how to get over heartbreak and disappointment a lot faster by giving a deadline as to how long I can grieve without structure. And then like, I just remember these moments of like my first real love broke up with me and how devastated I was. And I remember after like several days, she came into my room and she's like, Renee, in her French voice, she's like, you stop this right now, turn this stuff around. So she gave me the freedom to feel all the emotions during that grieving period, but also okay, now's the time that you got to get over this, like move on kind of thing. So she taught me how to be more resilient.
That is so powerful. Do you think she was doing that intentionally, or that's just how she's lived her life and she really just wanted to support you in the best way she could?
I think it broke her heart to see me so sad all the time. So there's part of it, like, it was obviously for her, it was like, I don't want my daughter to be sad. It breaks my heart to see her sad. But I feel like she was called to be a leader in that moment too, because I was absolutely devastated. Yeah. And she was just like, it can't be like this anymore. You gotta change. I gotta stop thinking about this and then move forward. And it was like slow process, but with her help, I got over things a lot faster. And I was like, every single time there's like little things, like little roadblocks or forks in the road that I approach, I think back of like all those moments of resilience that I had to really go through in order to get past these hurdles. And part of that started with my mother. Like even when like one of my best friends, when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, maybe a little bit older, she got invited, like her and I did everything together. Literally our backyard's attached. And so we played Barbies together and soccer and rollerblade. And I remember the first time I called her to say, hey, do you want to go and play? She told me no, because she's going up the street to play with somebody else at somebody else's house. And I asked if I could come and she said no. And I remember that first point of rejection as a child, because I wasn't cool enough. And at least that's how I interpret it. I wasn't cool enough because if I wasn't invited then. So I remember that and hanging up the phone and then crying. And then my mom was just like, well, then call the other kid up the street and go play with him. Like, what's the big deal? So it's kind of like, okay, it's helping with the solutions. So I think that's like, I guess, the framework. And I think of the book too, like one of the best books that I've read recently, situationally, was The Obstacle Is a Way by Ryan Holiday. And when my son was 3 years old, broke his arm, and he had to have surgery, of course, it happened in slow motion right in front of me. So then I felt guilty. Like I could have prevented this. He's a kid. It was not preventable. It was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get over that. And my mom was like, it happens. It's kids. You've broken your bones. You've had stitches. Like, just get over it. So there's that. But then the book helped. The book helped me because like I always look at these situations that happen in life. You think, what's the lesson in this for me? Like, what do I need to learn? So in that instance, after reading the book, I learned that Noah, who was having surgery, was a stoic. Like he taught me about stoicism. I think that's how you say it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, how can a 3-year-old be so stoic? In like, he was such a champion through all of it. And yet I'm the one that took it the hardest.
Yeah. How did you say he taught you about stoicism? What did he do specifically that you felt helped you?
He just, okay. So he broke his arm at like 6 p.m. And then we got in to have his surgery at 8 a.m. And I stayed with him in the hotel room. And that day, the day of the surgery was the day that we were all supposed to leave as a family and with friends of ours to go to Prince Edward Island because we rented a cottage for a week. And I was like, okay, this happens. Like my kid's having surgery. I don't know. And it was closed surgery. So they didn't actually have to cut him open. They were just resetting the bone, but he needed to be put under. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, how about I go to my husband, I go, you take my other son, Max, and just go with the other family. Don't have this ruin the vacation for everybody. I will stay with Noah. If he wants to go, then we can go. So 8 a.m. surgery, everything's smooth sailing. We get out of the hospital at 1 p.m. Everything's great. Noah's not really in any pain, which was surprising, but not. I didn't know what to expect, but he was very like aware. Is this like the afternoon after he was like put under, and he was very aware, and we're driving back home and I'm like, Noah, do you want to just go home with mama and like lay down and watch movies? Or do you want to go for an hour and a half long drive to a cottage and be with everybody else? And he's like, I want to go to the cottage. And I'm like, okay. So I brought like all this stuff to make sure he was comfortable. The next day, that kid went on his first roller coaster ride ever.
Nice.
And I'm like, wow. And I was like the protective mom, like, oh no, don't no. I'm like to my husband, Dan, no, he's not going to the theme park. He's not going on the roller coaster. The kids are going to be on the splash pads. He's going to be jealous because he has a cast on. No, he's like, get me on that thing. This isn't stopping me. And then he even turned to me, like all the kids were jumping in the pool. And he's like, Ma, I'm okay that I don't have to swim. I understand. Everyone's having fun. And I'm like, this is from a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't even think I have the maturity to think that way sometimes. I'm like, who are you to tell me you're schooling me?
I know. It's almost as though if we are really careful as parents not to attach meaning, like our meanings to what's happening in the moment for our kids, then they get to create their own meanings from it. And usually they're pretty positive meanings. They don't have to be negative meanings. Like the kids come out with this, like their cycle to resilience is so much faster if we don't put our stuff on them, if that makes sense, right? Like,
yes, it totally makes sense. And I had this conversation with Dan the other day about how like people have problems with meditation and relaxing the brain. And I was like, so we have all this stuff from our life going on. And I'm like, how can kids just completely turn off and get over things? Like, how can they be so resilient, especially emotionally? And he said, and it was so right. He goes, they have less stuff like less things they're thinking about. They don't have those worries. And so they can shelve it. And because there's less negativity, then there's less to worry about.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I know they don't have to like balance their books and talk to the accountant in 2 minutes. Like they don't have to worry about these things.
Well, plus if as parents, when we do interact with them, we're not creating negative frames for them, they're less likely to jump to a negative conclusion. Like I had a friend when I was in school who my mom didn't really care what the neighbors thought. And so we had some pretty unconventional things going on in our house because she didn't really care what the neighbors thought. I had the most wonderful mother. And like, she just was like, oh, I want to hang the Christmas tree from the roof. I'm going to hang the Christmas tree from the roof. Like, that's kind of how she lived life. She was always always has been very unapologetic. She still is. And, but my best friend, her mom was the exact opposite of that. She apologized for everything. She worried about what the neighbors thought. We would be having a conversation and she'd say, oh, well, what would the neighbors think about that? And I remember as a kid having this dichotomy of my mom who didn't care what the neighbors thought, and then my best friend's mom who really cared what the neighbors thought, and how I didn't have as many preconceived notions kind of planted in me that were jumping to a negative frame where she did, because it was quite routinely planted in her. Like they just always saw things kind of negatively. And when they're little is, I feel like when they're most open, like I think about my kids when they were little, they were just like open little beings. And so if they weren't upset, I didn't get upset. Like I did my best
Yeah,
to
I
not
love
get
that.
too upset if they weren't upset.
And it's interesting because like it's hard to not want to impose your beliefs, like this whole indoctrination of our life that's based on everything that's happened in our childhood, right? So like if you grew up in a super Catholic household, there's a very good chance that you'll be Catholic as well, whether or not deep down is something you want to follow, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. So when my parents were young, they grew up in very like strict households, and my mom even spent a few years at a boarding school. And
Oh,
so yeah, so when my husband or when my dad and my mom got married and decided they wanted to have kids, they agreed that they were not going to raise my sister and I the way they were raised. Because my mom, strict, super Catholic household, like proper table manners, all this stuff. And my father, whose father was on the road, he grew up with an alcoholic mother and a sister who has Down syndrome. And so they were like, we're not doing this with our kids. So then they taught us those beliefs. And now my husband and I are very intuitive. We read a lot. We educate ourselves about different perspectives. And now we're trying not to impose so much of these beliefs onto our kids and hoping we're giving them enough freedom so they can explore the world from their own lens and not from ours.
yeah. And one of the things I really value with my kids is letting them always be asking questions and answering the questions and teaching them how to seek to find the answers that they're looking for. Because I think that we are very open-minded and inquisitive as kids. And our job as parents is to give our kids the best ability to find the answers that feel right for them, and still while having underlying values of how you treat people, how to value humans while you're still finding your own way.
Yeah, no, it's true. It got me thinking, of all this yeah, I mean, we could totally go down a rabbit hole here with this topic.
Totally.
Yeah.
So tell me I want to know one thing you really struggle with as a mom.
Um, I mean, there's a lot, but the big thing is like really this doubt of being enough, and not like being enough for me, but like, am I giving enough emotional support? Am I giving enough quality of time with them? Like, am I giving enough for them? More like the most important thing is to trust me. I don't want them to have feelings of abandonment or that I don't love them or I don't care for their best interest. I want that trust. So I always worry that it's not enough. And I'm not talking about things. I'm not talking about like time, because I get time is important. But the reality in time with your kids is it has to be quality.
Yeah.
So we think, oh, I know it's a mom that works 40 hours a week and you only see your kids in the evenings, all this stuff. Yeah, it's like you want to be with your kids, but then it's like, but if you were with your kids all the time, would it be quality time?
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading this study years ago where some company, I gotta find this research. They interviewed like 1,000 men. What was it? 1,000 men about how they felt about having a father that was out of the house, so like traveling for work, and reflected on their memories of their time with the father. And the majority of them said that they don't even remember that he was gone all the time for work, because the only time they remember was when they were together. And so these successful traveling fathers would come home, and when they're home, they're home.
Yeah.
And it might only be a couple hours a week, but the only thing they remember about those couple of hours is how amazing it was to be a dad. So when we think about, being enough, it's the time thing is a lie.
Yeah.
but it's the quality that matters, because you reflect on any memories of a child. It wasn't like, oh, I remember my dad was with me 100 hours a week. Woohoo. We had the best time together. No, he works. My mom works. They had interest outside of their work and their family too. So yeah, I guess that's probably my biggest thing of parenting, is just the enoughness of quality time.
Yeah, I find I struggle with that too. And I've been a single mom and worked for a long time. And I have processed and systematized many things in my life, like the doing of my laundry, the cleaning of my house. There's a lot of things that I don't do that a lot of moms do on a regular basis. But I years ago sat down and I was like, well, my kids remember that I folded their laundry and I cleaned their rooms, or will they remember that I was present with them when I was with them? And that was like the quality time that we spent together. And this is family day weekend, and they're both bringing their teenager friends over for family games night, instead of choosing to be anywhere else. So I think over time, if you just focus on like that connection, it's way more important than the quantity of time.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you feel like you have to like punch in, right? Like you clock into parenting as like, oh, I got to get my 8 hours in today or else I won't get paid.
I don't think that's how it works.
No,
I also
wish.
think about, I have a great relationship with my mom now, and I see how, like, my littlest sister is 30. So my mom hasn't had a baby for 30 years and she's still very involved as a mom. Like, there's still duties as grandmas. And I think sometimes we have to remember that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yep.
And so the amount of time we spend with them now, it just continues for a long time. Like, if we build the right structures around our kids now, then they'll want to come back when they're adults and we'll be parenting for a long time.
Yeah. But then it gets more fun, right? Because then you're just like empty nest, and actually it doesn't get more fun. I don't know these, but I love these moments still. They're squishy. They're cute.
Oh, I have loved every moment of parenting. Like, I loved when they were babies. I loved when they were little. I loved when they were 7 and 8 like your kids' age. I love them right now as teenagers. And I always I do miss who they were when they were little. I definitely miss a lot of that, but I do love the phases and stages.
Yeah. Oh, I can say I loved the newborn stage. Ooh,
Oh,
that was
no.
a doozy. The first 3 months. Whew.
That's because you had 2 back to back and you were running a business.
Yeah.
That was like, I actually, when I hear your story about what you did, it would have been a lot. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we had Max, and I just finished launching an agency, and we had clients all over the world. And 11 months later, we welcomed Noah. And then we got to this point where it's like, okay, this is not normal. And there's a reason why people don't do this. I get it. But we really needed to systematize our family life in order to be functioning adults and functioning employers. So we actually applied all of these like systems and rules that we used in our business to our family life, which helped us understand, helped me understand the finances, helped me understand like scheduling, about creating an operations manual for our family life. And what we learned is that when you're organized, like they say, for every minute spent organizing is an hour saved.
Yeah.
So we set up these kind of procedures of how our family's going to operate, including a mission statement and vision and values. And we would write down where we needed the most help. And with a 11-month-old and a newborn baby, you're not getting a lot of sleep, right? It was crazy. And so we wrote down like a dream list. Oh, a night nanny. We want this, a cleaning lady 2 times a week, this. And we started checking off the things we knew we could afford and started implementing them. And it was really hard for me because, going back to our conversation of, what our mothers think, or like, what has our parents taught us about parenting, is I grew up in a household where still it was like my dad was super helpful, but it was kind of construed that the women did everything.
Sure.
And so the idea of me having somebody come in at night to help with my newborn child, it was like, all I could think about was like, what would my mother say? Oh, my mother, And so we didn't ever, I don't even know if we've told her to this date, because I just don't want to have that conversation. But, letting go of those, oh, I should be doing this, in order to, like, someone says, would you rather have your baby sleep in a bassinet with you every day of the week and you only get 3 hours of sleep? Or what about having 2 nights of the week where there's a bonus 8 hours of sleep, what would you choose? It's like, well, of course I want that extra sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was getting over that indoctrination and like the shame of giving that responsibility to somebody else who were paying so that I could get 2 nights of sleep a week.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the biggest lesson learned, is like creating the systems, but also the letting go, relinquishing control of those things in your life.
Yeah. And I also find I use the same systems in my business as I do in my life on a regular basis, but I also find it goes the reverse way as well. Like what's true when raising kids is also very true in running a business.
Yeah.
So, when you have team and staff and like with kids, you just kind of have to pick your family rules and then repeat them over and over again. And we decide, I always think as a parent, when we're picking rules, we decide what we tolerate, right? Like we're willing to, there's things that I'm willing to tolerate with my children because it just doesn't bug me. And there's things I'm not willing to tolerate. For example, I hate whining, like whining, meow, 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 meow. Like anything that comes at me with a whiny voice drives me bananas. Yeah. So my kids know not to whine. Like I just looked back at them and I was like, no whining, none of that. But I don't mind persistence because I value persistence so very much. So if they ask me the same thing 55 times, they might actually get what they're looking for because I don't mind the persistence as much. And so my kids don't whine, but they're pretty persistent to ask over and over again if they really, really want, like whatever it is, a sleepover, something for dinner or whatever it might be. And I think that the skills that we learn in parenting apply to our businesses. And I think the skills we learn in business can easily apply to our family lives and at home.
Yeah, I think so too. And especially with compassion, like how you would approach a child to overcome a problem is with ease and compassion. Maybe those same rules apply to people on your team or, partners or whatever, vendors, is leading with compassion. So it's true. Yeah. Those same rules apply the other way. I like that.
Yeah, totally. And just like you have 2 kids that are 11 months apart, I'm guessing they have 2 very different personalities and 2 very different sets of needs, 2 very different ways of going about doing life. Yep. Which is also true. And when we run businesses, that not all team are the same, or vendors or people that we're working with. Like, I think I've learned from my children. I've learned more from my children than I have anyone else in the world, just in how they're such amazing teachers.
They are. They really are. It's crazy. We have some behavioral issues with one of my children, and potentially, we haven't got him tested yet, but potentially he could be on the spectrum, which we don't know. Maybe not, but he's a unique child. I love him. But it's definitely testing my patience and my ability now to balance the mom worry, the fact that we're homeschooling him full time and working on my business full time, and my other child being in a school. So there's just a lot going on, but the lessons in that. And I think about like the times of running my business, kids are a forcing function for you to get as productive as you can in the time that you're given. And so when people say, oh, I can't run my business and have babies, I'm like, yes, you can. If you structure it well, you can totally do this, because kids are human alarm clocks. So they're very mostly predictable when they're going to wake up, right? So you can structure your day around that. And knowing at the end of the day, if your kids are in daycare or school, you only have these like 8 hours to get your work done. The people that were single, because I know I was once there running my business, would get up whenever and they would work till whenever. You don't have that with kids, but it forces you to be super focused and constrained on the things that you actually do take on in the day. They've taught me that.
Yes, mine have definitely taught me the same thing. Especially when they were littler, and they needed more hands-on. Like mine right now don't need as much hands-on time. They can get their own snacks. They can get their own, like make their own, they bring me tea if I need it, like it's a little bit different for me now than when they were younger. But when they were younger, I also learned a lot at night. So I would like run my business during the day when the kids were at school. And then I would have learning to do at night because I had to take classes or courses or whatever it was to be able to go back and run my business the next day. Because frankly, I didn't exactly know what I was doing. And I just got really, really finite about the activities that ended up in my life as well. Like who was in my life or where I spent my time or what was important to me. Like exercise was important. So I made time for that. But I didn't really foster a lot of like deep, deep friendships at the time because it wasn't that important to me. I picked my like 3 or 4 good friends and I just went in on those friendships. And I didn't do like, if it was like, oh, we're going on a girls' weekend, I'd miss that because it wasn't as important as raising my kids,
Yeah.
building my business, what had to happen there.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's like, and plus you're so exhausted at the end of the day. You just
Oh,
can't,
I know.
there's
Sleep
nothing
isn't
left
an
to
issue.
give. Yeah.
My
There's
mom
nothing
always used
left
to
to give.
say, I have insomnia. And I was like, how can you be tired? My head hits a pillow and like one of those little dollies, my eyes close. Like, I
Yeah.
don't understand
Yeah.
how you're not tired enough to sleep.
Yeah, no, it's true. So, like, and with the friends thing, I actually saw this meme, maybe it's a meme, about someone who's like say like friends that are texting at each other. And one of them is like going through something hard in their life. And the text says something like, do you have the emotional capacity to deal with me venting right now? So like it was permission to be like, are you in a space that can help me right now? Because I'm going through something hard. And I was like, how beautiful is that? Because we just assume your lifeline, your bestie is the person that can help you when they're going through their own stuff. And like a
So
good
true.
friend knows this. And so
Yeah,
like for you, it's like you, by you saying no, or you're not coming out with us if we're going out, to have a couple drinks or we're going to do this thing, it wasn't necessarily because you didn't want to come. You probably totally wanted to go. It's just that
totally.
your capacity for that was just not there because you
Yeah.
had so many other things. That I get it. So yeah, the good friends understand that. And I love that. So now that's like my filter of if I need to vent or I'm complaining about something, I'll ask, do you have like the emotional capacity to deal with this right now?
I love that. I'm going to use that. That's very good because it's asking permission of those that you also care about and shows that you're checking in on where they're at also.
And preparing them for the BS that you're going to download.
Yeah. And then ask them to promptly forget because really you just need to vent it and
Yeah.
then you'll feel better about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then forget I said any of this.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I feel so much better. And then usually like, the other person doesn't even get a word in. They're like, well, glad I can help.
No,
Yeah.
that's so true. So what do you find running your business now with your kids? What's the one thing that you feel like your business gives back to your family and your kids, not in money, but in other ways?
Definitely a flexible schedule.
Yeah.
That is that is a huge reason that I do what I do is that freedom, the freedom of like the lifestyle freedom. One of which is almost every single time the school's ever called, the daycare's called because my kid is sick or my kid has that, I went to pick them up because that's what I wanted to do. Huge value for me. I didn't want to send a nanny or I didn't even want to send my husband. When my baby's sick, I want to be there. So starting the business has allowed me to have that flexibility because I control my schedule. Like I don't do calls on Mondays and Fridays. And I stack my coaching calls in the week. I have like, you can pick the days and times you want to work.
Yeah.
And so that's what I love. And the other thing is just the massive potential impact I can have. So my mission is to help inspire over 1 million women to start their dream business.
Mhm.
And I can't wake up in the morning feeling that I have a purpose. Yes, I have kids. Yes, I'm a wife, but like that's not just your life's purpose. Knowing that I have this mission is a purpose. So having this business allows me to inch towards achieving that mission or that goal. Otherwise, yes, I could have done it other ways, but not in this manner because I want the lifestyle freedom.
Yeah. And one thing I love about when you approach life that way is that you're also showing your boys that that's okay in the women that they love and that they date and that they marry and that they have children with later on in life as well. That I believe that when we as moms live completely and fully like that it actually exudes for our kids to be able to do the same. And I have a daughter, so whenever I think about the example I'm setting for her, it's like, who do I want her to be when she's older? And when I look at Julian, my son, I think, what do I want him to encourage and support in the women that he loves?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. It's
special. You have a girl and a boy. I only have 2 boys, so it's really loud and sticky and messy and yeah.
It's loud and sticky and messy with a boy and a girl. I have to tell you, my daughter is way more like the messy, sticky, loud.
Yeah.
She's way more than my son. Like they almost are reversed in that way. So I don't know if it has so much to do with gender and just the way the kids are. So
Or like
we went
firstborn, secondborn. Yeah.
Firstborn, secondborn, like what way they popped into the planet this time. I don't know how they organize themselves, but they're all uniquely different. And people I know who have like 4 or 5 kids, they all say that, right?
Yeah.
Like every child is different.
Yep.
I have a good friend. Oh, go ahead.
There's just knowing it's like, oh, that's something like I shared on Instagram today. There's this kid who has a sled and it's like snowy out and he hooked the sled to his bike and on the back of the sled is his dog. Right. And so he gets on his bike because he wants to go visit a buddy, but he wants to bring his dog and his dog's, and it was so cute. And I shared it and I was like, that's so Max. That's so my son. Like he would do something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just so cute. Understand it. But Noah wouldn't. That's too much work for Noah. He would not do that. But Max would be curious about how can I make this work? Bring my dog for a sled ride. But yeah, their kids are so different. And then they mature and then they change and then become a different person. And then it's so fascinating to watch them grow up.
Yeah, so good. Let's wrap on what's one thing you would love the moms that are watching us who do run businesses to know about just accepting their situation, where they're at. What would you say to all of them?
The toughest part in this journey is loving yourself enough to be okay with failure. And I don't there's just so much shame and expectations in our society to be the person that has to do everything, be the mom, the house manager, the entrepreneur, and think she has her stuff figured out. And it's like, the reality is nobody's got it figured out. Nobody does. Like I remember when I was running my agency and I had a team of 12, I would show up to the office and every morning I'd be like, morning guys, I don't know what I'm doing today, but have a good day. And like, it was a joke as like the CEO founder of coming into a $1 million agency. But inside I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. And I right. It's like 2 minutes before a huge sales call or client call. I was like, nope. So the reality is like, be okay with those imperfections and no one knows what they're doing. And if you ever met a mom who genuinely believes that she has her stuff together, I want to meet her.
I know. Well, I just think they're liars if they think they have all their stuff
such
together.
Liars. They're either liars or narcissists. It's one or the other.
Or maybe they found, because I think no one knows what they're doing. I think that's so true. Often when I walk into my business, I feel the same way, or I'll say the same thing. I'm like, who put me in charge? I don't know why you're all looking at me to solve the problem.
Well, and I will say this, the people that claim to know what they're doing are probably coming from a mediocre mindset because they're not trying new things. They're not reading the books. They're not pushing themselves forward. That makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah. And I think that just as we figure out what we know that we're doing, whether it's with parenting or scheduling our families or business or whatever, as soon as we get to that level of comfort is when I think we just kind of should bump forward. And so the second I think I have something figured out, I just assume that it just means there's something new on the other side for me to now figure out.
Right. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And like, even as like a good parent, even as a good entrepreneur, partner, is you have to be educating yourself and understanding it's like, this is the capacity of what I know about this given subject. And I have a problem with this, then I know that there's a room for improvement. And I think that gap is often where a lot of women in running businesses and being mothers to start to feel like they doubt themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's gotten me through those times is knowing how and when to ask for help.
Yeah.
And from who, how can I ask for help from people who know more than me about that one particular topic or subject so that I can grow faster and get coaching from them.
Can we jam on that for one moment?
Yeah, of course.
Because it's so easy to say, ask for help, but most of the time women don't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And they're intimidated, think, oh, who's going to help me? Or why would they want to talk to me? Let me tell you, anytime I've had an issue in the parenting world and there was somebody, whether in my network or some acquaintance that I knew had the answer to this or has been through it before, I just reached out from a place of love and like, hey, I remember this, my friend, Natalie, I was like, hey, Natalie, I'm having problems with Max. Here are the symptoms. And I know that you actually took a year off to homeschool your son. Can we chat? Can we just jump on a phone call? And like, most people are willing to help. And she did. And we chatted for an hour and got so much help. And so it's easy to say, just ask for help, but sometimes we don't know what we need to be asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like really diving in about, it's like, what do I actually need help? Because when you can actually hone in on specific things that you need help with, that will allow you to find the right person to ask the right question to get the solution that you need.
Yeah. So I have a method for doing that actually while you're saying this, because I think you're right. A lot of us don't know how to ask for help. Every day at the end of the day, when I like before I retire for the night or when I'm kind of winding my day down, I write down, where was I uncomfortable today? And I reflect on that. And like sometimes it's as simple as my bra or my shoes were clicking on the floor. Like that's one thing that came up a few times is we have these beautiful hardwood floors in my office and it's so loud the way my shoes click on them. I was like, oh, I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. But other times it's uncomfortable because it's like, I'm worried that like one of my kids is struggling at school with friends and I don't know what to do about it. Or I'm worried about like whatever's coming up for me and where was I uncomfortable in my body? Where did I not feel like I had something handled? Where did I get kind of like sweaty palms or that anxious feeling? And just by reflecting on that every day, then I start to see patterns. And then I know what I have as like what's not working. And then who can I ask for help? And that's been a huge thing in knowing, like you say, like if you're having problems, because they don't usually show up just all at once in one beautiful little wrapped package, like at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, you know?
You can at least be prepared for it. Pour a glass of wine before it shows up.
Yeah,
we're good.
No, usually like when you're struggling as a mom, it's these little things that you can't figure out, like, why are lunches hard for me to make? It's not just one day they're hard to make. Like I struggle with getting lunches ready for my kids for school. Years ago, I was like, that was always a stress in the morning. Like, oh crap, I forgot to make them lunch. So, you know, but it when I wrote down, hey, I'm struggling getting lunches. Oh, that means I should start a habit of making them the night before. And then also, how can I delegate some of this to the kids? And so I put like their snacks where they could reach them. They packed their own lunch and all I packed was like the main sandwich or the wrap or whatever it was that they couldn't do on their own when they were little. So I think it's the step before even asking for help is being aware of what are we not so equipped to handle so well.
And what do we need? Like I remember, so my husband and I, we see a couples therapist when things are good, when things are bad. Yep. And we had the same scheduled time with her. And I remember showing up for the first few sessions individually and together. And I kept showing up with the same kind of baggage. And she's like, I don't think this is a relationship thing. This is a you thing. And you need to fix that about yourself with somebody else or with me before you can fix the relationship thing. It turns out it was never the problem with the relationship, as most things aren't. It was a problem with me. And so not having that perspective now, I'm thinking, oh, we're fighting in a relationship, but that wasn't it. It was me. Right. There was the thing with me. And it was end up being my lack of confidence, my resentment. But why? Right. And so then when I worked on that, my relationship was like perfect.
Yeah.
And so when we look at these, like asking for help, it's like, do I really need help with, nighttime routine with the kids? Or is it something more than that? Right. Mm-hmm. And so really looking deep, asking the 5 whys, like why this, why actually helps a lot. And we do that with my son, Max, whenever he's having like a little episode, we ask the 5 whys and it helps. Like we get to the root of what actually is the issue behind him being angry. And it wasn't the fact that I said no to him having cookie. It went further down to a point of like, oh, I didn't know this had anything to do with the fact that your blankie was in the wash and you wanted it, right? Like it's not
totally.
And it's not the no to the cookie.
Your blankie isn't here.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh wow, okay. Yeah. So making sure you really understand what you need help with, and then asking the question around that is a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also in asking for help, like pick the select, like if you go out to your network and ask somebody that, so there's 2 thoughts I have about asking for help. One is to make sure it's a safe place. Like, ask the friends that are willing to give you the real answers, not the bullshit answers. And then secondly, if there are people that are experts, they're very often, if you ask, they're so happy to help.
100%. There.
Good.
I'm here to help if anyone has any questions.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much for joining us. This was delightful, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Rich Christensen, and through the years of entrepreneurship and growing crazy businesses, I lost a view of what was really important. Through a series of really tender experiences, my mentor taught me you can replace anything in this world, but you cannot replace your family. So I made a dramatic pivot and started embedding deeply in my family some of the same principles that applied to business. My wife and I began very deliberately parenting. We looked for models, how not to mess our children up. There were really no good models to teach values, to entrench family unity, and to make sure that the values passed on in legacy to my children, and more importantly, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So like every great entrepreneur, I secretly created my own models. I was very hesitant to talk about it, but a few of my closest friends saw the impact that this was having on my children. I decided to take the processes that I used and create an online course so others could also work with their families to create tighter bonds, build confidence and self-esteem, while constructing a gorgeous legacy that they could live on past our lifetime. With this 5-part digital training series, you'll find the single most important lessons of thought leadership that I've ever created. There's 5 critical parts to this series, each with its very unique function. The first is symbols, creating unifying symbols that we all can touch to. Second is the doctrine, the guiding principles that we can tag and understand what the rules are. The third is the traditions or the rituals, where we actually formalize and we unite and show that we're unified with the values. The fourth, my favorite, the defining life events. The final section of this is the structure. What do the really wealthy families do to preserve their wealth and to pass on in the form of family banking? To pass on how you appropriately set up the will and how you embed your family constitution so that these values permeate and pass on. I can tell you firsthand that taking these steps to create a beautiful life for my family is the most important work that I've ever done and also the most rewarding. I would invite you to learn some of these principles, unify your family, bond them, and take some of the guesswork out of this. And I'm going to provide you the framework to make that happen with this 30 years of life experiences. So join me, get your membership to build family legacies today.